up! Behind this curtain lies a ghastly concoction of delight, horror, fantasy, and terror. Your every wish is our command, your every whimsical desire brought to life. But I'm warning you, there's always a price.
Hi guys, before we get to today's topic, I have a video I need you all to check out on Minds and BitChute. It's about Dusky Novel. Now, in the past, he's gotten in some trouble for impersonating and or saying he spoke for big members in the community, like Obi Scribbler, Lost Narrator, and many more, thanks to the Secret Dreamer and her due diligence after talking to friends of the victims after a month that she managed to produce some screenshots. Some of those screenshots seemed kind of vague, but it was certainly worth following up on. So myself, thoughtbubblepony, Quill Stroke, and Shelly D had a talk with Dusky Novel, and he confessed in call that he had ERP'd with an 11-year-old minor. He came forward in the call and said he was getting help allegedly. He didn't offer any proof. I've been told that the police have been contacted by one of my peers. Don't expect Jerry to talk about this one because thoughtbubblepony was in the call, and Brittany thinks that Jerry is a pedophile. So, Jerry, how many minors have you protected? One more time, special thanks goes to Secret Dreamer, the person who the Secret Rift is named for, as well as the Lost Narrator, Magpie, and anyone else I'm forgetting, for their help behind the scenes. Here's a clip from Dusky calling out a epileptic person and telling them that they were using it as a crutch and excuse.
Okay, hello everybody, this is Dusky Novel here. As my friend stated in the video, I have a severe case of adjustment disorder. But every time something goes wrong, I don't use my disability as a fucking crutch. I don't use it to make people put pity on me.
Naturally, we'll get back to this. But if you've looked around the fandom, or the internet in general, there's a lot going on. Yes, I have a response made on this matter. It should be up soon. This is in response to In Defense of Pedophiles. Oh boy, we got a real winner this time. We're going all the way to the skeptic community.
Sargon, listen to me. In your madness, you've taken individualism to such an extreme that you're destroying the world around you.
Who cares? All that matters is the individual.
Pedophilia pisses me off because it's one of those topics that you can't even talk about.
Now, some of you guys are gonna want to hear a fair and balanced discussion on this topic.
If you make any kind of comment that sounds remotely like you don't absolutely despise pedophiles, then everyone's knee-jerk reaction is to call you a pedophile by association.
Look, my man. On one hand, we're all at one time or another have all decided to go against the grain. Everyone wants to be edgy and be a rebel. And on some levels, and at some times, that's admirable. On the other hand, to quote Kyle Proflosky, they want to fuck little kids.
So you have to preface every single sentence with, I don't find kids attractive and I don't support pedophiles, just so people will listen to you. But I've said before that I'm not attracted to humans, period.
There's a good reason that a smart man distances himself from this kind of crap. I'm sure the furry community is doing cartwheels right now, seeing you use the furry shield to avoid criticism. Didn't Kevin Spacey try and do this same thing about being gay? How'd that work out? But yeah, Kothorix, that was the worst time for you to remind people you're a furry. You did your friends and fans zero favors with this one.
That people who watch my videos know that entertaining a thought does not mean that you necessarily agree with a thought. So there are several kinds of pedophiles. There are pedophiles which are people attracted to young kids, such as a 30-year-old wanting to have sex with an 8-year-old. There are child molesters who are 30-year-olds who actually do have sex with 8-year-olds.
Do you have a problem with 30-year-olds or something? I hate to tell you this, pal, but I'm pretty sure an 18-year-old can be a pedophile, and potentially younger. That's a long discussion. I'd look up your state for federal laws, and maybe perhaps Kothorix is being comical in a very dry and unemotional way on a very touchy subject, maybe the joke flew over my head. Maybe I imagined the fact that the pedophile known as Toon Critic, aka Zach Keys, who confessed on tape, wasn't really 26. Oh, carry on.
There are pedophiles by technicality, which is something like a 20-year-old wanting to have sex with a 16-year-old. And this is also called a pedophilia.
Now, I've seen this term come up before. As I understand epophilia, 1. Sexual attraction of an adult for a pubescent adolescent. In layman's terms, you want to bang teens, I think? Now, morally, if you want to argue that wanting to shag someone between the ages of 13 and 17 makes you less scummy than, say, someone who goes lower, I mean, mathematically, practically, someone who steals $50 worth of goods is less scummy than someone who steals $500 worth. And, you know, when it comes to sentencing, if someone wanted to argue that someone should get more years, who goes after a child who's younger, for each year that the child hasn't aged, that argument might have some merit, but I'm not looking to let lesser infractions off, so much as I'd be willing to pile on more punishments to those with more severe offenses.
What irks me about our society is that it doesn't matter which one of these you are. It doesn't matter if you actually commit the crime, because even if you think about it, you are still seen as just as bad. Now, I have nothing to say in defense of child molesters. They are weak people and have irreparably damaged another human. I don't see them as any different than rapists. But for those who simply have the thought of being attracted to kids, I have sympathy for.
My man, nobody likes thought policing. However, if anyone admits to wanting to have sex with kids, yeah, that's a bad scene. There are some fetishes in the world, across pretty much most cultures, that you become an instant loser in the game of life. I didn't make these rules. And yeah, it sure is cool to question society norms, because we all don't want to feel like sheep. And being an individual always feels hip and cool. But sometimes there are reasons for these medical, spiritual, or practical applications. And while your sympathies, while potentially well-intentioned, and your feelings, those shouldn't really matter.
Because sexuality isn't a choice. It's something that is part of you and you can't get rid of it. And there are no real options for people who are attracted to kids. You have to keep it to yourself.
I've talked about this before when I mentioned the LGBT movement, that if you don't keep your eyes on some of these people, these sneaky fuckers, that they're going to start slipping support for pedophilia. And I had some people in my audience telling me, well, FNGR, that's been long since debunked. There's nobody like that. Here's a video from a channel with 35k subscribers, with 61,000 views, 2,600 upvotes. 2,600 people agree with LGBT.
Yourself for fear of society branding you as a child molester, or fear of being on some kind of watch list for a crime that you have never committed. And the way I see some people react to them sickens me more than the thought of pedophilia itself.
Wow, I haven't seen this level of virtual signaling since Alex Rochan. Go see How Not to Brony 72. Okay, pal. Now, how in the fuck does how you feel hold up medically, legally, morally, spiritually, or anything else? We're almost 2 minutes into your video, friend, and you've yet to establish anything other than you feel mighty uncomfortable. In real life, pal, I don't tell people I'm a brony. I don't see a reason to. It's stupid to give people information about yourself any more than they need to know. Members of the LGBT movement have long and hard at progress. I won't say how far that they've gotten, other than it's a great deal better than it used to be, because that's a long discussion for another person in another place. I want you to see something. There's a video up on a channel called Heart's Progress. Our mission, fight for LGBTQP plus rights. There'll be a link down. Well, I'll have a card right here. Have you thought about the negative effect that standing with pedophiles would have with the LGBT movement? I think there's this assumption that people have a boundless amount of acceptance. That is not true.
Because they are so harshly judged and hated, and rarely is that hatred about kids being hurt or exploited, or actual things that I could understand feeling hatred about. The hatred is because their sensibilities have been offended, and because it's socially acceptable to hate that person.
And here it is. Are you telling me I have to take medical classes on child health, behavior, and psychology before I can hate a pedophile? Because I think you just don't want people to hate pedophiles. Do people understand at first glance, at a deep-rooted and informed level, why they should really hate pedophiles? Do they really grasp all the ins and outs on the medical levels on what they can and do to children? Probably not. Do you understand how retarded you sound on this one? One of the biggest concerns people used to have around gays, or propaganda against keeping them out on the outskirts of communities, is that they might hurt children. Those people have worked long and hard to get to the point across wanting to have same-sex relationships isn't the same thing as wanting to indulge in children. I'm sure I've super abridged all that, but Kothorix, the promise, the big payoff for that inclusion of said groups as a whole is the majority of those groups would abstain from such behavior. There is a science behind why. There's a vast, overwhelming majority of doctors who agree to, and people in government office, and the public all seem to be on the same page here. Jane and Joe Sixpack shouldn't have to take months and months of classes and studying a very disturbing topic so that you can be more comfortable when they're already making the right choice.
A thought and desires that they can't control. I've heard people say that pedophiles deserve to be tortured and killed. Now, I don't believe in the death sentence, even for mass murderers, much less for a person who has not even committed a crime.
I feel like I heard this somewhere before.
Even someone as awful as Hitler, who was probably the worst human being in the world, who committed suicide. He didn't deserve it either.
Look, friend, I'm not saying that you're a pedophile, but I know a pedophile by the name of Performance Major who made this argument already. All I'm learning from this video is how you feel.
In the case of pedophiles by technicality, that is someone like a 20-year-old having sex with a 16-year-old, I find the reactions of people even more disturbing. Because, once again, it is people holding the law as a moral authority. I certainly believe that you should follow laws, but not all laws should be taken as this divine voice.
Show of hands of people who've ever downloaded a movie, a song, or any kind of media that they didn't own off the internet at any time. I think the audience knows this. In fact, I think the average person in this new cyber age, well, maybe it's not that new at this point, are very indifferent about at least a couple of laws, for better or for worse. You can go through any number of state laws and find some weird, wonky bullshit, or even federal laws. I think I recall that it's illegal to bring a woman across state lines, immorally questionable actions. For example, if you drove a girl across state lines in Las Vegas to gamble, assuming the state you used to be in didn't allow such a practice, you might be breaking a federal law.
Sure didn't. It's a federal law passed in 1910. Which makes it a felony to engage in interstate or foreign commerce transport of any woman or girl for the purpose of prostitution or debauchery, or for any other immoral purpose.
Now, I'm not a lawyer. People are encouraged to try and find their own wacky laws in their own counties and states. I promise you'll find something amusing that's likely on the books, but not enforced. Kothorix, if I could religiously judge pedophiles, and not just be laughed off the internet, I would. But because of the law, I can now do it legally. Now, if you want to call me a coward for hiding behind the law, I mean, shit, son. I don't even have the balls to admit I'm a Brony IRL. I promise you, the internet and the people in general are going to be far more forgiving of cowards than pedos.
Why does the law decide that a person becomes an adult at age 18? There is no magical leap of maturity because the sun has revolved around the planet exactly 18 times since they were born. Based on personal experience, I would say that between the ages of 16 and 22, most people I've met don't have drastic changes in their maturity level.
I'm sure we've all heard the argument. We've met teens that are more mature than some 30-year-olds. Spirited Rainbow from the Brony fandom is far younger than I am, and none of mine or her friends would say I'm more mature than she is. I'm a late 30. The idea of 18 is the legal standard is for expediency. Would you prefer there is some kind of bureaucracy, some kind of standardized mental test administered by the federal government that would grant you a sex license devoid of age? That sounds really boring, and I promise you, kids aren't going to be happy about having to study for the fucking nightmare of a book that son of a bitch would be made out to be.
The age of consent being 18 strikes me as odd. Shouldn't the age that you are allowed to have sex be based on when you reach sexual maturity? Why is it considered such a moral crime and a sick thing to like a 16-year-old? Attractiveness and beauty standards are almost always measured by youth. Pornography distributors especially value youth, and the reason is because we have a natural drive and instinct to breed with those who are young.
Fun fact, porn across the United States of America has an 18+ cap. All porn that plugs barely legal as a selling point, the girls are 18 or higher. Do you know what porn with girls under 18 legally counts as? If you guessed child porn, you get a cigar. That's not my opinion, that's the law. Law that even the most seedy of porn industries bends a knee to.
The legal age of consent is 16, and yet you're still viewed as some kind of sicko for being attracted to someone of that age because the general population thinks that 18 is the age of consent everywhere. In Japan, the age of consent is 13, which many Americans view as sick and twisted, but I'm sure the Japanese just see it as normal and consider Americans exceptional prudes.
Warning! Warning! Bullshitter alert! Bullshitter alert! Warning! Warning!
The Children Welfare Act, Chapter 34, forbids any act of fornication with children, where defined as anyone under the age of 18, 48, with preferences and districts specifying further details in largely similar obscenity ordinances, like adding exemptions for sex in context of a sincere romantic relationship, typically determined by parental approval. There are 2 territories of Japan that have their own local age of consent laws, Marcus Islands and Okirinato, I'm sure I've butchered that, islands, where the age of consent is 13. The common misconception, brought to you by pedophiles who need to defend their stance, try to claim that this is mainland Japan. It is not.
Now, why am I defending pedophiles? Well, the truth is, it's not really about pedophiles. The hatred and stigma attached to pedophilia is just one example of a problem in our society. And that problem is people taking the letter of the law as an absolute moral authority.
I don't suppose this has anything to do with the fact that you're a role player. I saw your video from getting banned from F-List. Tell me, Special K, did you have underage on your list of kinks? Is that what this is about? I know people like Doodle Tones roleplay as 8-year-olds in sexual situations. Links down below to that video. It's called Why Do You Roleplay in Public? I kind of get the feeling this is a bit more close to home. This comes from a self-serving standpoint. So tell me, Thorax, is this about social awareness, or is this really about you? I'm just asking. I do want to briefly break here, just to make sure that I include this somewhere. This is from WebMD, link down below. The American Psychiatric Association, the APA, has included pedophilia in its Diagnostics and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders since 1968. Kothorix, that's not how I feel, that's a fact. So in addition to being illegal, it is a mental defect. Now, if you want to come back with something along the lines and saying, well, autism and even attention deficit disorder are also mental disabilities, that's true. But those two have never been illegal to the best of my knowledge. Having trouble paying attention and missing social cues aren't against the law. I'm sure a lot of people on the web are grateful for that. There, I made sure to include at least one medical citation, as opposed to the 0 that Kothorix gave.
You do not have to agree with me. You don't have to suddenly love people who have sexual fetishes that you find disgusting. But I think you should consider one thing. 150 years ago, it was considered disgusting for a white woman to like a black man. 50 years ago, it was considered disgusting and even a mental illness for a man to like another man. What happens when the law and social stigma isn't on your side? What if it was considered a crime to be religious? That even if you don't practice this illegal activity, just having the thought of loving your God is considered disgusting and a mental illness?
You lose. Ultimately, we found out that minorities and gay people were just people with different heights, weights, colors, etc., etc. Things that weren't absolute defining characteristics, but merely features of an individual. A red sports car doesn't go fast because it's red, but many of these groups found inclusion because they managed to prove that they were separate from the groups that you were talking about. One day I will have to go before God, and I'll have to tell him that I blackballed a bunch of pedophiles socially. Look, friend, if I go to hell when I die, I doubt that'll break my top 10 biggest sins.
What if the perfectly consensual, legal pornography that you like is suddenly considered criminal and disgusting and devious by the government?
Insert your preferred digibro joke here. As far as porn goes, the government actually does a fairly pretty good job of not getting in the way of adult entertainment. At least not since the dark days of The People vs. Larry Flint. And guess what, Kothorix? Old Larry had to go as far as the Supreme Court to defend his freedoms. Hustler Entertainment, one of the seediest porn companies in the world, if not the, had to go through the legal hoops. He had to check all the boxes. He had to cross all the T's. He had to go to hell and back again. And it wasn't just magically bestowed upon him. Christ, it's another entitled millennial who wanted his microwave dinner 5 minutes ago.
What if suddenly you're considered a disgusting and evil individual because of the color of your skin or your gender?
I'm half Mexican, and as far as my lineage goes, I rather liked being referred to as an abomination when I grew up. Kind of fun being another human being's monster. I was rather proud of it. I can't imagine why anyone would need the everyman's approval. Sounds rather boring if you ask me.
I do not ask that you suddenly love pedophiles. I don't ask that you tolerate crime. I suppose I just want people to feel some amount of understanding and compassion for those whose thoughts and desires don't line up with their own sensibilities. And maybe have some faith in others, that even though they may have unsavory desires, it does not mean that they will act on them. Thoughts and desires alone don't make you an evil person.
I have zero faith in my fellow man, and if you show me anyone who does, I'll show you a sucker. The last thing we need is more trust in the world. We as individuals need to keep an eye on things. Kothorix, you swung one way too hard. It's like you need to let these people off the hook, without going into specifics why you feel that way. The only person in your video who's speaking ill-informed is you, Blue Boy. You didn't mention one example of a single exact person who has pedophilia who got treated unfairly by the public. It would be pretty easy to say because there isn't one. And on that note, I've been waiting to say this several times throughout the video. Thank you, fuck you, bye.